Almost March, and it had been a while since we had Isaac Trotter on CBS Sports and 24/7 Sports college basketball writer. Isaac, how are you, buddy? Good to see you.
Doing well. Good to be here.
Well, between our fantasy baseball prep, we're covering a lot of college basketball here, and I want to dive into where you think of this field for the NCAA tournament nationally. Want to dive into the Big Ten, but of course, we got to dive into Illinois, which has been a eventful last 6 to 8 weeks here. Isaac, as they had lost 8 of their last 15, but get a win against Iowa to basically solidify their NCAA tournament bid here. But what happened from this team looking like the Final Four kind of sleeper to all of a sudden it was, is this team going to get in the tournament? Yes, they will, but they need to pick it up to have any confidence going into March.
Yeah, it's kind of been a year of recalibration for how I feel about Illinois basketball. Because, I think early in the season when we talked about them, I acknowledged that there was a floor with this group that did include not making the tournament. Now, I didn't think it was likely, but I thought there could be a floor of that. And then immediately, like by, early January, I'm over here going like, I think they're a tier 1 national title contender. And then a month and a half later, I'm like, I don't know if they're like, are they not going to make the tournament again? It's been a weird year of oscillations with Illinois basketball. And, I think at this point, I've kind of just looked at it as just get to March healthy and let's see where your chips fall. Because I think what we've seen from this group is that like they have not been consistent enough over a game-to-game basis to be like, yeah, I feel great about them winning 3 or 4 games in a row in March. But there's a lot of teams that go into March feeling the exact same way. And it's about getting healthy, getting whole, trying to find our balance and try to find some semblance of an identity. And if you can find that, you just give yourself a chance. And that's kind of where I feel like I'm at with this team. I'm not going into March with any aspirations of like, oh, this team is definitely making the Final Four.
So how much of like the blame do you put on injuries and illness, kind of wrecking this team? Because it's obviously had an impact. And then how much you put on, these players, this coaching, the approach, like all of that. Like, how do you kind of divvy all that out?
That's a nuanced question, like for me, because I feel like it has to fall on some, like the players. Like I'm somebody who I blame the players first more than the staff more often than not. Like players have to play better. They're the ones out on the floor. They have to continue to make good decisions. But like the injuries and illness are definitely a part. It's not the part of this team, but it's definitely a part. At one point, Illinois had like a plus 35 net rating in Big Ten play when Tomislav Ivisic and Kasparis Jakushonis were on the floor together. Like when those guys are on the floor together and whole, Illinois is a really, really good basketball team, and we have a big sample size of that. But there's no question that like I didn't necessarily love like where this group was trending in the middle of Big Ten play, because it felt like for years, whenever there was an injury, I think back to like the Iowa Sumo injury, it was like, no, we have enough in this locker room. And we've seen that throughout like Brad Underwood's tenures. Like we have enough. Like we have more than enough in this room. It doesn't matter who's out. Remember Kofi Coburn goes down and they play Michigan State like right after that. Like Benjamin Bosman's Verdonk is playing like double 20 something minutes, and you find a way to win games like that. So like to hear the staff or Brad Underwood like make these excuses, I understood it, but it just was so different than what my experience with Illinois basketball has been over the last few years. So it's nuanced. I felt like there were times where I felt like Kasparis Jakushonis hit a little bit of a freshman wall. And when your best player hits that type of wall, you're probably not going to play very well. And in the Big Ten like this, where the margin for error is really, really thin, struggles have obviously popped up. And then I honestly think there's 3-point variance here that's in play. That's a huge subplot with this season.
Give me that number. I know you've done some research on Illinois' 3-point shooting and 3-point defense. Give me it.
So in the last 10 games, Illinois is shooting 27% from 3. Their opponents are shooting 41.7% from 3. That's a 14.7% gap. The national average is about 2% or 3%. So like at 14.7%, like this is a historic number. It's an extreme outlier. And it's like, it's hard to reconcile that, because it's like, how does this happen? Like, how is this happening? A part of that is shot selection. And when you take a lot of tough step backs off the dribble jumpers, that could explain why you're not shooting well. Part of it is, they're dorking different defenses, and like you're giving up open threes, and then Femi Odukale makes a bunch of threes, and then Jackson Kohler makes his career high in threes. So you can kind of explain it a little bit, but that 14.7% gap is something that, if you're looking at it from just a raw numbers perspective, that screams, positive regression. Yeah. And there's an example of this earlier in the year. Kansas State had a very similar type of profile when they started 1-7 in Big 12 play. And then magically it flips, and they reel off 5 wins in a row, and they beat Iowa State and they beat Kansas. And it's just like, it's weird. Like basketball is a weird sport. And especially in an era where this is the highest 3-point attempt rate in college basketball history. Teams are shooting almost 40% of their shots from three. Like, we have not seen this in college basketball before. Those oscillations can lead to some really wild outcomes. And for Illinois, they've been on the bad end of that in a historic way over the past 10 games.
Yeah. And I was just looking at the last 10 games. They've won 5 of them, right? So that's a crazy part of this. It's like, well, if some of that starts changing, maybe they could figure something out here going into March. So, all right, if you're an optimist, they have Michigan and Purdue left. I think Michigan's a very, very good team. They're not perfect. That is for sure outside of that front court. Purdue is reeling right now. So what do you want to see to go into Selection Sunday and for you to be filling this out, the bracket, and for you and some of the other national guys be like, hey, that's 6 or 7 seed or 9 seed Illinois. Look out for them. Like, what would you need to see over the next 3 or 4 games if that includes the Big Ten tournament?
Yeah, I think they have to start just putting it together on both ends and starting to string together multiple, good outings in a row. And you kind of look at Michigan and Purdue, you kind of feel like you might be catching them at a good time. If you kind of look at what Michigan's done, their offense ranks outside the top 130 in the last 10 games. They have really struggled to make shots lately. And that was actually a concern for me with them in the preseason. When they had Amari Burnett in the starting lineup, he was the only guy in that starting lineup who had made 53s or more on that roster last year. So like, they have some real shooting questions. Now, maybe if you're an Illinois pessimist, you're like, well, good, they're going to get hot right when they face us after they've shot 26% from 3 for the last 10 games. But that's a big part of what that group is. And then Purdue, I think Michigan's problems might be a little bit more fixable because I think they do generate great shots. I do not think Purdue's issues are fixable. Like they are really struggling to protect the rim at a constant rate. And that's one thing that has been a real identifier for me that I've really looked at. Those teams that can really protect the rim moving forward tend to advance in March. If Illinois has been one of the best rim protecting teams in the country when Tomislav Ivicic is healthy, if they can find a way to get him healthy, if Perez Johnson gets back and gets healthy, and you're seeing Illinois have a couple games in the Big Ten tournament with Johnson and Ivicic back, I think then you could start to talk yourself into them if they could find a way to get to the bottom of the bracket. Like I think the top of these 1 seeds this year are terrific. Yeah. If you can find a way to get to the bottom of the bracket where you're a 6 or a 7 seed or maybe even a 10, you might feel better about yourself, so your chances to go on a little bit of an extended run if fully healthy.
We've talked a lot over the last month of whether this roster experiment has worked, and a lot of that will depend on the next few weeks. But just kind of looking back, now that we have a huge sample size of this team, 29 games in, what do you make of this roster experiment for Brad Underwood, and how do you think he'll approach it moving forward based on what he saw this year?
Yeah, I have a roster app that I look at rosters all the time. And so I think about this stuff like basically 24/7, especially with the portal less than a month away. And you think back to like some of the different decisions that they made. And I think of Dante Maddox, the kid who from Toledo, the transfer who ended up picking Xavier. How much could he have helped this group when you're really struggling for that one more shot maker to potentially have into it? I think going back, you kind of understood the process of building this team. But, I thought this team would shoot it way better than what they have. Like, this team on paper is supposed to make shots, and for some reason it just hasn't. And, I look at Maddox, and he's gone to Xavier. A little bit of, him and Ryan Conwell are both kind of like the same player. And so sometimes he doesn't get to play as much. And I look at him with his potential fit at Illinois. It's like, man, if he had picked Illinois, probably could have seen him on the floor. And maybe you have your version of Alfonso Plummer, who can give you a little bit more of an offensive jolt when you so desperately need someone to make shots. So yeah, this was a bet on, skilled size and shooting. And I definitely see the skill and the size, but the shooting just not coming together has been really jarring. I don't think anybody would have expected something like this when you saw this roster on paper, in the preseason. So it's weird. It's really weird. And maybe it's just an anomaly, and maybe you find a way to get hot again down the stretch. Because remember last year when you headed into March, I think top 100 teams were shooting like 42% from 3 against Illinois defensively. And then in March, it suddenly flipped and Iowa State could buy a 3 to save its life. It's weird. Things can happen. Maybe this group can find a way to make shots again down the stretch. But this team built on shooting has not shot it well. And I wonder how much they would have, maybe prioritized some extra shooting in the portal with a guy like Maddox.
What do you make of Will Riley, Casper Siakishonis as NBA prospects?
Yeah, so I think it's changed a little bit for me. I think Kasperi Siakishonis, I thought he was probably in that mix to go third or fourth a couple months ago. I don't see that right now. I think he's probably closer to that 7-8 range, just because other guys have started to play well. Trey Johnson from Texas has played terrific lately. He scored 39 points last night against Arkansas and has looked really, really good as a big time shot maker. Ace Bailey, for all of his concerns early in the season, has really found a great groove. He's a terrific player. Dylan Harper, for a while there, I thought it might be a question between Dylan Harper and KJ, and I think Dylan has certainly separated a little bit there. So I think Kasparis is locked into that 5, 6, 7 range. Will, I would be hard for me not to spend a top 20 pick on him. The size and the playmaking at that size is pretty tremendous. And his little feel.
I ask you this because I asked Jonathan Gavoni in New York,
yeah.
and he's like, yeah, Will Riley, I don't think he's coming back. And then you see Sam Vecini, who I really respect a lot, has him number 49. So there's a little bit of variance with Will. Kasparis, both those guys have number 5. So there's no doubt that guy's a lottery pick. But Will, because you think of what he could be in year 2 of college and how much money he could make at Illinois. And, I think he'd be a Big Ten Player of the Year candidate. I think he'd be a lottery pick. I mean, next year's loaded too, right? With the NBA draft. So not sure if that matters for him, but boy, he's intriguing, just with the variance with him, but you're in on him.
Yeah, I do. I just I like big stringy playmakers. I do. That's kind of I like that feel. And I think he's shown a lot of those when he gets the ball at the elbow and those little spin moves to get to the rim, guys that long shouldn't move that well or shouldn't be able to create as much separation like that. So yeah, it is tantalizing to think about, hey, maybe he's a Big Ten Player of the Year contender next year. But you're right. If you looked at that 2026 mock draft, it is loaded at the top too. So it's this isn't some deal of hey, you come back next year, you're definitely a top 10 pick. That's not necessarily the reality in college basketball these days. But he'll have an interesting decision to make because he's obviously made real strides with his body. Under Fletch, and you could potentially walk into, hey, another offseason under Fletch, you probably come back and you're looking like a lean, mean, muscled machine, and you're going to go score, 22 points a game. But yeah, for me, I've operated under he's gone, and their biggest decisions coming up here in however many weeks, 4, 5, 6 weeks, is probably Tomislav Ivisic, Merez Johnson, and we'll move on from there. Those are the top 2 in that order.
All right. This looked like a fun Big Ten Coach of the Year race, but it feels like our boy Tom Izzo is running away with this, despite all our doubts about this team coming in here. Just tough as hell. Just a tough as hell team. How did this happen with Michigan State? That I'm filling out my all Big Ten teams. It's hard to find a Michigan State guy to put on there, and I think that's perfectly Michigan State.
They are they're just better than the sum of their parts, whatever that phrase is. They just have done a terrific job of elite buy-in. And, I think they've also done a great job of understanding where this roster was headed, because there was a while where Jace Richardson was playing 18 minutes a night and it just didn't make any sense. And credit to Tom Izzo for changing his rotations a little bit. Here are Jace's minutes last 4 games: 34 minutes against Maryland, 33 minutes against Michigan, 29 minutes against Purdue, 26 against Illinois, 33 against Indiana, 35 against Oregon. For a while it was hey, everybody's playing 18 to 24 minutes. Not anymore. Jace is that guy on that team. And I think it's really changed, again, talking about recalibration with Illinois, it's really changed how I feel about Michigan State, because this half-court offense is not good. They're 11th in the Big Ten in half-court efficiency in the Big Ten. It just is not a good half-court offense. But when Jace is on the floor, that completely changes things, and they rebound, and they're tough, and they get after you in transition now more than ever. And sometimes change is good. I think the A.J. Hoggard experience was time, and they have upgraded that position. Even though AJ's had a nice year at Vanderbilt, they've upgraded that point guard position, and those guards can go. And there is something to roster building when you can get elite buy-in like this. And I think a lot of people would love to have that. Very few can actually organically create it in this portal era. Tom Izzo deserves a lot of credit for what he's done with this group.
Yeah, Wisconsin's one of those stories too, right? Of buy-in. I mean, I think you and I were both all in on AJ Storr after what we saw in Minneapolis last year, but the fact that they've come back. And John Tonje, is he taking over Player of the Year? I mean, the way Purdue's ending the season, I think Braden's had a phenomenal year, but what an evaluation that was to completely change that program.
He was committed to New Mexico.
Yeah.
He was supposed to go to be in the Mountain West to play for Richard Pitino, and now he's pivoted to Wisconsin. And yeah, that Wisconsin group, that's another group where I think it's underrated how much they've chose to change and evolve their offensive skill set. Like, I looked this up. This is the most points that Wisconsin has ever scored in transition in Wisconsin basketball history. This is the fastest Wisconsin basketball has ever played. This is the fewest amount of mid-range jumpers Wisconsin has ever taken. Like, they have completely modernized that offensive approach. And yeah, it's crazy because Chucky Hepburn leaves and AJ Storr leaves, and you're like, man, this program's really poor. And they look bad from the outside, and they've done just a terrific job. And keeping John Blackwell was outstanding. I will be curious to see if they can keep him again, because a lot of teams, I think, are going to have a lot of interest in John Blackwell heading into his junior season. But Tonje and Blackwell, it's hard to find two guards like that, like in the Big Ten and in the country. Honestly, they're both big, strong, physical, get to the rim. They have shooting, and it's kind of crazy. Like, they don't feel like they miss Tyler Wall that much. And he was a really good player for them. And Nolan Winter has really stepped into a huge role as just a solid knockdown four-man who can also pivot and play the five. And again, player development is another undertone of that, because was anybody thinking that Carter Gilmore and Kamari McGee would be like good, legit Big Ten rotation players heading the year? I wasn't. And they have been awesome. McGee's offensive rating, 134. That's 17th best in the country. Carter Gilmore is 126.9, 82nd best in the country. Like, I would have been caught dead before predicting that in the preseason.
Is there anybody you like in the Big Ten to make a run in March?
I mean, if you had asked me 24 hours ago, I would have told you Maryland. I think that Maryland group has a lot of the pieces that I look for.
I know our boy Latuab disagrees, but Gillespie, you can't shoot that shot at that moment.
Okay, I didn't hate the shot either, but I was more irritated at Queen for not going to offensive rebound.
I get it, but I don't like giving the other team a chance. Like,
you're totally right. And the thing is all year Gillespie, and I tweeted about this, like, Gillespie's so good in late game situations because he's drove the ball. He's constantly getting to the paint. So it was a little bit weird to see that. I wonder if the moment just got a little bit too big for that group, but Maryland still has like a lot of the ethos of a team that could be really scary, because the too big approach is hard to guard. And Gillespie, other than for last night, has been a stud this year, maybe one of my favorite lead guards in the Big Ten. And then Rodney Rice is a complete killer, like just a complete killer off the ball, who can also handle it a bit. So I think Maryland would probably be one of my best answers. I still think Michigan can, if they can somehow make shots again, because they are winning the math in a great way. They dominate at the rim offensively, and they dominate at the rim defensively. And that's been a real way to create that math advantage for them. And if they could somehow make threes again, then they're going to start beating teams by 20.
I wish I would have put money. I'm not a big gambler, but I wish I would have put money on John Tonje to win Big Ten Player of the Year. What the odds would have been there? And Derek Queen to win Freshman of the Year. Odds would have been way better on that but I mean, in this class where you have potentially 3 of the top 5 prospects in the NBA draft in the Big Ten, and Derek Queen, like, feels like he's the Big Ten Freshman of the Year, which is crazy.
It is crazy. And he hasn't even shot it all that well from the jumper's perspective. It's like everything feels like it's 15 feet in. And again, he's one of those weird, like, quirky bodies that feels like he just finds a way to move differently. He's got like a little Dane Danger in him a bit, where just the way he moves off the bounce and the wiggle and the shake at that size is terrific. But I do think Queen would probably be my vote for Freshman of the Year. But there has not been a freshman that's been more dominant when healthy than Harper.
Yes.
Dylan Harper, like, when at his absolute best, has been better than Queen at his absolute best, in my opinion. Just the health and what everything that's gone in. I totally understand Queen, but like, there's also nights when you flip on Harper and you're like, my God, like, he could get to the rim whenever he wants.
I thought he'd run away with it. Like, I mean, he is, I think, the highest floor NBA prospect. Ace Bailey's the highest ceiling NBA prospect, but Queen's impact on winning, right, is got to be taken into account there. And I don't want to blame Dylan for not having a great team around him in Ace, but still, like, I think Derek's going to win it, which is kind of crazy to me. All right, nationally, you said it. Is this the year where the number 1 seeds look as safe as they have in a while? Because, boy, I mean, we just saw what Duke did. And I know they're rolling through the ACC, but to beat Illinois the way they did, Auburn has been dominant all year. Who you like in this tournament?
Yeah, so the top 4 teams right now on KenPom are putting together historic net ratings. We have not seen 4 teams that have a plus 33 or higher net rating in KenPom's internet era. Like, we have never seen this with 4 of them at the same time. So it's kind of nuanced where I feel like a lot of people have been like, oh, the portal has brought all this parity to the sport. And yeah, that's true. But like the 1 seeds this year, I think are still going to be awesome. Like, they are awesome teams with very few flaws. And then I think there's that big second tier of like a lot of really, really darn good teams. So if I'm talking from an Illinois perspective, I really don't want to be on that 8-9 line, because I'm telling you, like, Duke is like, we've seen that one up close and personal. Like, they're just different, and they have great positional size, and they create so many mismatches, and they create great shots, and defensively they've been outstanding all year long. Auburn, almost the same type of deal. They're one of the oldest teams in college basketball. Janai Broome is just a complete freight train in the middle. But I think the underrated part is their guards can go this year. Last year, their guards were pretty iffy, and it kind of hurt them in March. This year, their guards can really, really go. Florida, same type of deal. Awesome at the rim defensively and terrific guards. That's a terrific strategy. And Houston, I think Jamal Shed leaves and Houston's backcourt's really upgraded. And so, like, those teams right there are like, they're just on a different type of level. And it is fascinating, because I do wonder if we'll see the SEC be a little bit overvalued. Like, they've just been so dominant. Like, is this clock going to tick a little bit early? And we're seeing all of these teams here like get top 5 seeds. Like, what does that make the bracket look like? But I just want to see the bracket. I just want to see the bracket, and we'll go from there, but it feels like those 1 seeds are just a little bit different than the rest right now.
What's interesting will be where Illinois is placed, because they've played Duke already. They've played Tennessee and Alabama, who are still in the mix for a potential 1 seed. So it feels like if they were an 8-9, they'd be put in with Auburn, which has got plenty of storylines there with Bruce Pearl. And we've seen Illinois play Houston and how suffocating that can be. So that's why these next 2 games are so important for them, right? Like, win at least one of them, you feel like maybe you can play your way into a 7 seed. Win 2 of them and maybe win a game in the Big Ten tournament. All of a sudden, you're looking at that resume with 3 or 4 more quad 1 wins, and you're thinking, oh, this team could be 6 seed or higher there.
And that's the big thing, and also getting Merez healthy, because I think we've seen, like, this group, when Ivisic is not on the floor, like, they just have no semblance of defensive backbone. Like, and just, it's the personnel, right? Like, the Kerry Booth experiment has not worked out. You don't really trust the Ben Hemrick, Jake Davis front court to get stops. If you can get Merez healthy, and with what some of the defensive tweaks they've done, right? Like what they did with Ivisic last game against Iowa gives you a little bit more oomph defensively. There is a path for this group, because they do protect the rim at a really high level when Ivisic and Merez are both healthy. And that is the recipe, I think, for deep, sustained runs. You look at what UConn did last year. They had elite rim protection. That makes it really, really, almost a cheat code when you're forcing teams to play jump shot roulette over and over again. Like, you have to have that. And if Merez isn't healthy, I don't think Illinois can really sustain that over a real period of time. I wish he was healthy for the Michigan game, because I think that Illinois could have done a lot of what Purdue did against Michigan, where they just switched the big on big pick and rolls between Danny Wolf and Vlad Golden. But I do think Illinois, if this staff was smart, I think they'll start to take some other things that Purdue did against Michigan that really well. Like, they did a lot of blindside traps against Vlad Golden that gave him trouble. Illinois has not been a big post trap team this year, but I think you could use it against Golden to try to generate more turnovers. And if you can get out and run a little bit, that'll be fascinating. But yeah, you're right. Like, the next 2 games are enormous. The Big Ten tournament's going to be a complete blast, and a lot of opportunities for, quad 1 opportunities. And you could find your way up to the 6 line. You'd probably feel really good about yourself, because look at the number of the 3 seeds that you could potentially face. It's like Kentucky. I think you'd feel pretty decent about yourself, like, going up against that. Like, do you want to play St. John's? Probably not. But like, there is an opportunity where if you get to that 6 line, you feel like, hey, we're gonna have a puncher's chance. We maybe are 3-4 underdog in the round of 32 to go to the Sweet 16.
Mike Woodson's become a better coach over the last 2 weeks. They've won 3 or 4, including Michigan State and Purdue. But there's going to be a new coach. Who's it going to be? If Isaac Trotter were running this search, who do you go after?
Yeah, I think Greg McDermott would be my favorite pick of them all. I don't think that's feasible. I think Chris Collins would do a really good job there. Like, he gets the Big Ten. He's never had any semblance of resources. I think he'd be great there. But I just kind of keep going back to Chris Beard too, like the connections that he has with the program before. If winning is important to Indiana and winning is all that matters to Indiana, I tend to think that Beard is probably going to be a guy that moves up their board. I thought it was interesting the messaging out of Indiana early of like, oh, he's not on our board right now. And I wonder if that changes now that Brad Stevens has said no, Dusty May has said no, Greg McDermott has said no. It just feels a little strategic to me to say that early, and then when everyone says no, we'll pivot back to him, because I think we both know like the crispy, like if anybody read that police report from from the Texas incident, that was not that's disgusting to read something like that. And then at the same time, like you also understand though that like if he goes to Indiana, like he's going to get dudes and he's going to usually coach them up and they're probably going to be pretty darn good. And for an Indiana program that feels like they really want to win big, I could see Beard being a realistic target.
Yeah, and I hate using the word like they launder, like, but Ole Miss kind of took the first stab at that, like to rehab his image, and he's won there, and he's a really good coach. So maybe it's a little bit easier than what Ole Miss even had to do. Does Iowa, is this it for Fran?
I think so. I think change is imminent there. There's been a lot of names swirling already too, like the Darian DeVries heat has started to heat up there, does that mean Chester Frazier? Welcome back to the Big Ten, like type of deal. Chester Frazier in Iowa does not work in my brain, but like whatever, we'll see how that works. Ben McCollum's obviously a big name there too. It feels a little bit stale with Iowa. The fan support has really dwindled lately. Like you look at the attendance there, like people are not showing up to games at times. And then, they kind of walked into this year. Like I thought they did a pretty good job, honestly, in the portal getting a Seydou Traore, but in the portal, they were going after big time fours and they'd get them on campus and they just couldn't close. They were constantly getting outbid. They got outbid for Matt Cross. Nana Uso Nane ended up going back to Brown. Like it doesn't feel like they have the resources to compete at the highest level. And I just feel like Fran, the writing's kind of on the wall there. He's been a Big Ten staple, and I don't think they'll necessarily run him out of town, but it definitely feels like with all of the noise that you're hearing about some of these other coaches that are linked to Iowa, it feels pretty imminent that something's going to be changing.
Does Ben Johnson get another year in Minnesota?
I think he does. Now, I've had a couple conversations with people about this. Like Minnesota, kind of the way it was explained to me was that Minnesota does not have a lot of resources right now, and they think that Ben Johnson's a good coach, and they kind of want to see him armed with extra resources to see what that would be, because they basically were like, well, he put together a really good team last year. Like, remember when Tom Izzo said that he thought Minnesota could win the league if they got all their guys back? Like that was the real thing. Like, and Elijah Hawkins left for Texas Tech, has been a great point guard there. Pharrell Payne left for Texas A&M, been a great center there. They lost
Cam Christie
to the draft, who could have come back for a second year if there was a remotely competitive offer, and it wasn't there. So yeah, I think after some of those wins on the West Coast, they were starting to feel better, but then they go home and they lose to Penn State, Northwestern. It's like that's where it starts to get a little bit complicated. I think he's safe. If I had to pick one, I think he comes back for year 4 and they just give him a lot more money, but no question, like some of these late season losses haven't necessarily helped.
Yeah. All right, Isaac Trotter, you're the goods, man. Appreciate you filling us up with knowledge of college basketball heading into March Madness. Illinois, a part of it for a 5th straight year, which I don't think we should. I don't think we should overlook that, right? I mean, you and I covered some and watched some pretty bad teams there, and now the down season is potentially a 6 or a 7 seed if Illinois ends the season well.
Do you remember when Illinois? I can't remember what year in college I was. Remember the Nicholls State game where it was like a panic attack if they're going to win that game in like the beginning of the season? Like, it's come a long way. The program's in a very different state, but expectations should be high. You have one of the best budgets in the country. You've put together a roster that you feel like can compete. It's time to go. And I think that if Illinois, kind of ends the season with a whimper, fans have a very understandable right to be upset, because this group has a really high ceiling and they have to prove it over the next couple of weeks.
Good stuff. Isaac Trotter, 24/7 Sports, CBS college basketball writer. Appreciate you, man.
Thanks for having me.